We'll resume the hearings. Moving on to matter 12, which is about Worcester City allocations. Can everybody hear? Yeah, good. We've had a change of personnel, so can we go round the room with introductions, please?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Miss Suzanne Ormsby, King's Counsel, and I'm the barrister representing the South Worcestershire Councils.
Duncan Rudge, Head of Planning at Worcester City Council.
Anna Millman, Planning Policy Manager at Worcester City Council.
Emily Barker, Worcestershire County Council, Planning and Transport Planning.
James Dinn, Consultant. I've been working with the councils on the heritage questions.
Karen Hartley from Delta Planning, representing Maximus today in respect of the Blackpool Road site.
I'm Chris Dodds from Planning Prospects, here on behalf of the University of Worcester.
I'm Katie Parsons from RCA Regeneration. We are the planning consultants for Warndon Parish Council, and we've got Andy Taylor from the Parish Council to my left. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Geraint Jones, Planning Consultant representing Spetses Estate.
Hello, Philip Smith, Planning and Development Manager at Canal and River Trust.
Thank you. So the first policy is policy 61, which is the general one that all of these sites are going to be under the umbrella of Worcester City allocations. So question 196, the first one, is what is the evidence that the Worcester City allocations would be either deliverable or developable as per the framework definitions? So I've seen the council's statement that indicates that the allocations came from a call for sites and the Sheila process and were subject to SA. Since the submission, deliverability questionnaires have been provided. We talked about those this morning as well, so it'd be good if we could have sight of those. And that has resulted in some sites in Worcester City being considered no longer deliverable, and they're proposed now to be removed. For example, where you've had no response or where they've been built out. In the Worcester City section, there's 9 sites that have been removed, and the figures have been adjusted accordingly. So that reduction, as I understand it, has been reflected in all the documentation provided to us since last October. So that's already been part of the discussions that we've had so far. Yeah, so I don't think there's MMs for all of those proposed that I don't think we need to necessarily go through in detail, unless we come to them as we go through the particular sites. So before we move on to the sites that have got MIQs, because obviously not all of the sites do, there are some representatives with questions under the general question about sites that aren't covered elsewhere. So I think probably it's best, seeing as that's where I'm looking at you because I know it's RCA. It's probably better if we cover that now before we move on to the sites with the actual questions that everybody's sort of not more prepared for, but that are MIQs and we've seen statements, if that's okay. Mr. Rudge, did you have anything on that before we get going?
Thank you, ma'am. Just before we proceed, we have Rob Barnes, Director at Director at Planning Prospects, not here representing the University of Worcester, but representing GTEC for the site that RCA Regeneration and Warndon Parish Council are here for. I just wondered whether you might find it helpful if Mr. Barnes, who's actually sitting behind me, was to join us at the table for this and, as necessary, talk to the statement of common ground that we have on the GTEC site. Thank you.
Yeah, if he wants to join your side as part of the team, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so I'll turn to RCA then and let you make those points now, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mum. The site that we are here speaking about on behalf of Warndon Parish Council has got reference WCEM 02. It's the land at the junction of Berkeley Way and Parsonage Way. On behalf of the Parish Council, we have made submissions at Regulation 19 stage and hearing statements, and I know that they are very detailed and you will be reading those, so I'm not going to rehearse those. We do, however, note that there weren't any comments, we couldn't see any comments made by GTEC at Reg 19 stage or a hearing statement. We also checked the main and the minor modifications by the LPA and couldn't see anything specifically there. And obviously there were no LIQs raised by yourselves. A statement of common ground was submitted between the councils and GTEC, unfortunately after the deadline for submission of hearing statements. So we had not had sight of that at the time that we prepared the written representations for Warndon Parish Council. If it would help the inspectors after we've spoken today that you would like a response from Warndon Parish Council in writing, they are prepared to do that if it would assist. There are a number of concerns that have been repeatedly raised by Warndon Parish Council about this site, both in the submissions to yourselves through the course of this process and also directly to Worcester City Council. It's extremely disappointing that these are not addressed at all in the statement of common ground that's been submitted. They don't appear to be mentioned at all. It unfortunately appears that the site has been allocated only because it's got a planning permission. The planning permission, however, is no longer extant. There's no evidence of a material start on site that would make it lawful to commence it now. This is detailed in the reps. The site is located in the significant gap as detailed elsewhere in the submission plan and indeed in the currently adopted plan. It's also protected by a Section 52 agreement, which of course is the precursor to Section 106 agreements, as protected green space as part of the Warndon Village's urban extension master planning when the planning permission was originally granted. There's no mention of these things in the committee report that granted the original planning permission. There haven't been any works on site since the planning permission was granted in 2016. The applicant, despite claiming as part of that application and it being part of the planning balance that there were no alternative sites, moved into an alternative site before that planning permission was granted and remains there to this day. We would invite you to visit the site to see the lack of evidence of development, although I do understand that work has commenced to tidy up the site in the last couple of weeks, which is the first time we think anybody's been on site since the Newt exercise several years ago. In terms of justification, we can't see that there is a robust selection method for this site. The employment sites assessment, which is document SHELAR 63, appears to show that the site's been allocated simply because it's already got planning permission. It's in the significant gap with the Section 52 agreement and its protected green space. It does not appear that it would have been allocated if it did not already have a planning permission. And that planning permission, as we said before, is not implementable any longer in our opinion. We haven't seen any current evidence to justify it now for the purposes of this plan. It appears to be a self-fulfilling, well, we've allocated because it's got planning permission and it'll get planning permission again because we're going to allocate it. We don't consider it to be justified. We don't consider it to be effective. It's not going to achieve anything in terms of meeting a demonstrable need or in enabling a delivery. It appears to only consolidate a dubious and lapsed planning permission. Its proposed allocation is inconsistent with the strategic gap policy that's already adopted and indeed that has been proposed again in this plan. It's contrary to the wishes of the neighbourhood plan group and the parish council. An application was made for an asset of community value for the site. Again, we submitted this alongside the hearing statement. The decision on that was due 2 weeks ago but hasn't appeared yet, so we don't know if the council are going to grant that or not. It's a bit unfortunate that it wasn't determined by now. We don't believe it's deliverable on the basis of the existing planning permission lapsing and the fact that there's a Section 52 agreement in place protecting it. The lack of take-up on the site in the last 9 years does suggest some sort of issue with deliverability or developability, or that the claimed need for it wasn't as urgent as was put forward 9 years ago. This undermines the alleged need that led into the justifications for the council granting the planning permission, it appears that if it weren't for this allegedly extant planning permission, there wouldn't be a justification or a sound reason for allocating this site. It's impossible to implement it without being a material breach of the Section 52 agreement. We note that there is a statement of common ground that has been submitted, but again, it fails to mention the Section 52. It also incorrectly states that various consultees didn't raise concerns when the planning application was granted, when they did, especially on heritage grounds and on Worcestershire Wildlife Trust objected. We see that there's Regulation 19 objections from other parties as well, including Worcester Civic Society. On the basis that it is impossible to implement the planning permission, and it appears to have only been allocated because of the permission based on a need that arguably doesn't exist because the company are elsewhere and no other company has taken it in the meantime, suggests that this is a completely unjustified, unnecessary, unimplementable permission, and the parish council is firmly of the view that it should be deleted. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rudge?
Thank you. The position of the South Worcestershire Councils is that we completely rebut everything that you've just heard. The statement of common ground that's been published on the examination webpage, Exam 66, sets out very clearly that the site is both available, developable and deliverable. We had a representative on behalf of GTEC that will be able to explain that in more detail. But with regard to the Section 52 agreement point, it is entirely within the gift of the City Council to vary that agreement if the City Council deems that necessary. The site has not been allocated purely because planning permission has been granted. That is just one of many factors. This site would be proposed for employment use within the plan, whether planning permission has been granted or not. It is not true to say that that is the only reason that the allocation is being brought forward through the plan. The principle of development for employment use is established. The South Worcestershire Council's position is that that permission has been lawfully commenced and is extant, and that development could continue at any point. It is entirely for GTEC to decide whether they pursue the permission that they have obtained and relocate to the site themselves, or whether someone else develops the site instead, but equally for employment purposes. It does appear to the councils that the parish council is trying to revisit the determination of the planning application and reassess the planning balance, and clearly that's not appropriate for this examination in public, or to rehearse the planning balance. Sorry, just bear with me a moment if you will. So reference has been made to the asset of community value nomination that does currently sit with the City Council, but I don't think it would be appropriate for the City Council or the South Worcestershire Councils to comment on that and risk prejudicing the outcome of that nomination. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rudge has explained matters from the local authorities' perspective in terms of GTEC's position, and the suggestion that in some way they're not going to develop this site, or there's some hesitation on their part. I think it's worth understanding a little bit of the background there. GTEC is a company that many people in this room will be familiar with. It's a British success story, and it's a British success story born and bred in Worcester. Nick Gray started his business in a garage. He moved it to farm buildings. And when he wanted to expand into the city, he invested in that site and bought that site. The site is owned freehold by GTEC. The difficulty that GTEC had in securing that planning permission 10 years ago or so, at a time when the business was rapidly developing, led them to a route which saw further premises acquired, not freehold, but acquired just down the road from this site, with the intention of operating from there, but also from an HQ building built on this site. That was an ambitious proposal at that time, essentially to go from a rural setting into an industrial building and a new HQ building. And the development of the business at that time, 2015, 16, 17, 18, didn't necessarily support the investment in both buildings. But by the time it got to sort of the back end of that decade, 2019, that's when the interest was really reviving in the business to deliver this. And then the pandemic happened. So it's always been the intention of GTEC to develop that site. They own the site. It's GTEC's position, it's the council's position that they have an implementable permission on that site, irrespective of whether that is the case or not. And I know that RCA and the parish dispute that. But what that planning permission demonstrated was that this is a site that is capable of being developed. It's a site that is capable of being developed, and this business wants to develop it. It's a business that's going to have a turnover this year of about £80 million. And it's the kind of business that any, I would suggest, district council in the country would be pleased to have and would want to encourage and support. What's particularly important is the Worcester location. It's a Worcester business, it's a Worcester businessman, but it's also Worcester employees. And it is incredibly useful to have this land in such close proximity to the existing building that they've got. And their employees are drawn from quite a local area. So that's important to them too. So there is every intention of developing this, and there's every intention of GTEC developing it. And as Mr. Rudge says, even if that wasn't the case, this would be land that the councils would want to allocate for employment development anyway, given that it's intrinsically well suited to that kind of development.
Thank you. Arce, did you want to come back?
Yes, please, thank you. Sorry if these seem a little bit scattergun. It's just a couple of different responses to different points raised by Duncan and Rob. I mean, there was that explanation there that the principle of employment use has now been established on the site, but that was established by a planning permission that was granted without the planning committee being given the material considerations of the significant gap designation and the Section 52 agreement. And yes, I do understand the council's position that it's in their gift to vary the Section 106 agreement, but they should only do that through the proper route of an application with all material considerations being taken into account. Allocating the site would be a way of validating a flawed planning permission. We're not seeking to rehash the application, but the application appears to be the ground for the allocation. I've heard the council say that's not the case. I've not seen anything robustly justifying it without that planning permission to understand if and how it would have been justified to be allocated if that planning permission didn't exist, because that planning permission is dubious. The council and the applicant are taking the view that it's implementable, we've suggested several times that perhaps a lawful development certificate would be appropriate to demonstrate that, because it doesn't appear when you visit the site that it's ever been implemented, and that has been resisted. We feel that this proposed allocation is a way of trying to make right a planning permission that shouldn't have happened. Except the point that the asset of community value is perhaps a separate issue, but as I say, it's a shame that it was due 2 weeks ago and it didn't happen before this hearing. And it's interesting to hear Mr. Barnes say that it was always the plan to have 2 sites, because GTEC put in extensive submissions in 2016 to justify their application, and there was never any mention of another site or wanting 2 co-located sites. All of the submissions were about how there wasn't another site in the whole of Worcester, and if they couldn't have that planning permission, they'd leave Worcester. I would suggest that this is the facts trying to be, there's new facts being introduced to try and fit something that happened that shouldn't have happened, and the parish council very strongly feels that this allocation, this proposed allocation, would just rubber stamp it, and it shouldn't have happened, and it should be justified in its own right, separately from that allegedly extant planning permission. I'll just ask Andy if anything else to add.
Can't think of anything at the moment.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Rudd.
Thank you. Just to add that this site is included within the Economic Development Needs Assessment Addendum. The site is needed to meet the economic development needs of the plan. And as you'll recall from earlier sessions, the City Council and South Worcestershire Councils are keen to release a small amount of land from the Green Belt, off Blackpool Road, which we'll be considering a little bit later as well. And this all contributes to trying to meet Worcester City's employment land needs, so as not to overly rely on our neighbouring districts, that very fine balance that needs to exist. The point that was raised earlier about a certificate of lawfulness, I think the only comment I would make is that it would surely only be if GTEC thought that there was any question over over whether that permission was extant, that they would even consider whether they needed to submit a certificate of lawfulness. If they're satisfied that the permission has been lawfully commenced, then it would be a pointless process for them. Thank you.
I hope that there wasn't a suggestion that new facts were being introduced as some kind of post hoc rationalisation for what's now being proposed, because I'd resent that if it was a suggestion, and I'm sure it wasn't made. If I may, the case that's been presented by the parish appears one that relitigates something that was decided 10 years ago. The facts were that planning permission was granted on the site. The facts now is that we believe it's implementable, and even if it wasn't implementable, it is a site that is eminently well capable of supporting development. It's a site that's owned by a multi-million-pound local business who have a representative here today who is able to express the view that that is what they want to do. The ship has sailed in terms of what happened in 2015 and 16, and we're not here to redetermine that. But we are here to say that this is a site that is readily capable of being positively determined and allocated for what is in the plan, and that's what we'd like to see you do.
Okay, thank you. I'm reluctant to come back again unless it's brief points. We've got 2 sides of one thing that we're both going to have to take away and look at. Do you want briefly?
Briefly, thank you. It was just to address that and reiterate that the parish council aren't seeking to reopen the planning permission. That's outside of this process and happened some time ago. But if it's the LPA proposing to allocate it, not the applicants, the LPA's proposal, it's the LPA's plan, they should be satisfied that it is implementable to be able to allocate it, because you obviously need to be satisfied that it's implementable to be able to allocate it. And given the amount of information that the parish council have submitted, which I think you have most of it submitted to you to demonstrate the alternative, we're surprised the council haven't taken the opportunity to satisfy themselves by inviting the applicant to submit an LDC. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move on unless there's anything else.
Nothing to add, thank you.
No, I meant to say that at the beginning. If you've done your bit and you want to leave, just indicate and we'll do a short pause while you leave the table. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which is question 197 regarding Land Navigation Road in Worcester. The question asks, what is the evidence for the particular significance of heritage assets that may have been affected by the proposed allocation and how they've been identified and assessed through the plan? So there's exam 18 and exam 18A that set out a heritage appraisal of this site and some other sites. There's also a statement of common ground with Historic England, exam 80. Can the council just run through what the final outstanding areas of disagreement in relation to those particular issues are?
Thank you, ma'am. So this is a 14.25 hectare predominantly brownfield site close to Worcester city centre, to be allocated for new residential development and retention of some existing employment land. As you've already mentioned, we have the heritage appraisal, exam 18A, and appendix 3 of the historic environment topic paper to address this particular question. The South Worcestershire councils are satisfied that the potential impact of the development on the significance of heritage assets is suitably understood and appropriate mitigation can be secured at the development management stage in respect of the cathedral, views of, setting of, the riverside conservation area, canal conservation area, and the registered battlefield, for example. It's worth mentioning also that the Canal and River Trust have themselves produced a heritage, townscape and visual impact review, and that's appended to their written statement. Any applications will need to accord with the site-specific policy criteria, and as you will have picked up, I'm sure, the South Worcestershire councils intend to produce a heritage and green infrastructure-led development brief to guide the development and to inform detailed design matters and phasing. And with particular regard to concerns that Historic England have raised regarding views and vistas, it's considered that that development brief would be a suitable vehicle for making sure that those matters are properly taken into account. The Statement of Common Ground with Historic England contains the most up-to-date version of the policy, and just a couple of things, if I may, to draw to your attention. Historic England didn't feel able to sign a Statement of Common Ground that said that there were no matters of disagreement. The South Worcestershire councils believe that we have reached that point, and if you'll give me a moment, I'll try and explain why that's the case. Historic England believe that because they can't be sure that you would be agreeable to the changes in the version of the policy that appears in the Statement of Common Ground, they wish to still highlight their areas of concerns to you. However, changing the policy wording from at least 495 to around 495 and placing significant emphasis on the council's producing the development brief rather than an applicant, and emphasising that that development brief and the development need to be heritage and green infrastructure led. If they had greater assurances that you would be agreeable to those changes, then they would say that there are no matters of disagreement between themselves and the councils.
Yeah, that helps. So the version of the wording that's agreed between you and the latest vision with them is the wording in the back of the Statement of Common Ground, which I'm looking at, and then that has the around rather than the at least. So that's the correct, yeah. So they're as on board as is ever going to happen, really, provided, yeah, that goes as written.
That's correct, yes.
Right. So just on that, there's a concept plan that goes with it. How does that fit with the policy? Is that part of it? Is it to go in the plan, or is it a separate? Yeah, just a bit of explanation on that.
The concept plan is illustrative, and as you'll see, it's very high level. And we would envisage that the development brief would include either a much more comprehensive concept plan, which would also deal with the matter of views and vistas in more detail. It would also deal with phasing arrangements and matters like that. We would envisage that the development brief will include an indicative master plan as well, but that we can rely on the policy wording to ensure that any applications include a suitable proposal-specific townscape and heritage impact assessment.
The concept plan is referred to then in B, isn't it? New B. So we just need to be careful about the wording of the broadly in accordance with where we've been before, don't we? And so it might be have regard to is what we've gone with recently. So that might just need a bit of looking at. So the intent, just so I'm clear, the intention is that would go in the plan because it's referred to in the policy.
Yes, it would.
Thank you. I think I'm going to go on at length, but just to say that Mr. Wood has shared the updated policy and the Statement of Common Ground with us. So from a trust perspective, we're comfortable with the policy as reworded. And you've obviously got all the evidence before you, but we certainly think, and we've run everything past our own heritage advisors, internally, architects internally. We're happy with the extent of the information evidence you've got is adequate for and suitable for the local plan. We know there'll need to be a master plan. We're happy with the policy requiring master planning and further work, but I think we can obviously do your site visits. I think the documents you've got will assist in you looking at issues of views. But we're comfortable with where it's got, where the discussions with Historic England have reached.
Thank you, that's helpful. I probably should say this is one of the ones we have seen, one of the few, but we have seen this one. So yeah, and we'll see the others at a later date. It's just a timing thing that this one managed to get done. Thank you. Okay, I don't have anything else on Navigation Road unless anybody else does. Yeah.
Thank you. Just one relatively minor matter. We would like to propose some changes to the reason justification or explanatory text. You will have seen that they're not numbered in the Statement of Common Ground, but they are in effect paragraphs 3 and 4 to the reason justification, where those paragraphs refer to must conserve or enhance, or must preserve or enhance. We think that it would be more appropriate to make direct reference to NPPF paragraph 203, where there's
Just let me find where you are. Are you in the additional modifications or the minor ones?
this is actually
Major.
in the text to the Statement of Common Ground with Historic England. Apologies.
So mine doesn't have paragraph numbers.
No, I manually numbered them, and I think they're on that basis they're paragraphs 3 and 4. Paragraph 3 starts in order to sustain, and the following paragraph as well. We propose to change that wording to reflect MPPF paragraph 203, where the MPPF says shall have regard to the desirability of sustaining and enhancing the significance of heritage assets.
So that will come up when the MMs are revised. So but this supersedes what we're looking at in both the AMs and the MMs, does it? Because it's the whole, it is the whole thing. It's a complete.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we move on to question 1998, which is about Lowesmore Wharf. So the question says, given that there is a working boatyard on the basin, is the proposed allocation consistent with paragraph 187 of the framework in respect of the agent of change principle? So I've seen the council have indicated that the working boatyard will be protected as part of any redevelopment. Can you just explain that, and there's some MMs as well, I think, that go with it?
Thank you. Yes, so the South Worcestershire Council considers that the proposed allocation of the site does remain suitable and developable. The new development would be required through both the modifications being proposed and also through the planning application to provide any necessary mitigation measures to ensure that the neighbouring land use would not have an unacceptable impact upon new residents. This could include, for example, things like triple glazing where needed on certain aspects and any mechanical ventilation that might be considered to be needed. And that is reflected within the modifications that have been put forward through our response to the MIQs. It is recognised that there may be particular issues around that ventilation and noise disturbance on future residents, and that is really the reason for that proposed modification. I do note that the proposed modification was put forward as a footnote, which we would consider bringing into policy.
That's in the AMs, isn't it? I think. The scale.
I think it's possibly in the minor.
Thank you, that's fine. Anything else? Anyone else? Nope. So if we move on to question 199, which concerns Checkers Lane and Henwick Road. So what is the justification for the proposed boundaries of the site, and would they be effective? So the council have indicated that the boundary update is required to reflect the expansion of the university, and there's reference there to planning applications. There's also a statement from the University of Worcester. I think you're here today, so I don't know if anybody has anything to add on that, apart from what I've seen in your written submissions, obviously.
If I just say that having seen the written submission from the university, we'd be prepared to expand the site boundary to reflect that as submitted.
Okay, so that's not a mapping change or an MM at the moment, but it would be based on, yeah, okay. Yeah, it'd be helpful for you to come in on that, yeah.
Yeah, just to reiterate that the university supports the proposed expansion because it reflects their ownership and aspirations for growth. The area is the university's 7 campus, which is their health and wellbeing campus. So yeah, just supportive of the expanded boundary, but also obviously just to reflect that in the policy itself, the area allocated will also need to be increased, which is an obvious point, but just to make sure.
Okay, you didn't have any, so I'm presuming that would happen, so yeah, thank you. So if we move on to question 200, which is about the Shrub Hill Opportunity Zone. So the explanatory text refers to a new canal basin, and the question is whether that's deliverable and would the policy be effective in this regard. So again, I think there's an AM proposed to the supporting text to make the new canal basin an aspiration rather than a firm requirement policy. Is that right? Yeah. And I think, yeah, can you just talk me through? I think there's another AM I've got written down. I think there's some reference to the master plan. So it's an AM to paragraph 11.6, and it's introduced a reference to the master plan for Worcester City Centre. Oh, sorry.
I think that reference in the second minor modification relates to the Shrub Hill Master Plan, which has been adopted by the City Council through the Shrub Hill SPD. Through that Shrub Hill Quarter SPD, sorry. Through that SPD, there isn't any reference within the master plan to the new canal basin. So it is aspirational, and the site is not dependent on that new canal basin being delivered.
Okay, so if we move on to question 201, which concerns the land at Blackpool Road in Worcester. So the first question, 201, is about the site area and whether the 8.12 hectares is correct, whether the footnote 208 should be incorporated into the policy to refer to the amount of land required for flood mitigation measures, and if so, there should be any changes to the policies map. So can you just run me through the changes that have happened in the site area and why that's happened?
Thank you. So the site area of 8.12 hectares was correct, and that was a smaller cut of the land that had been put forward. Reflecting on discussions we'd had in relation to this site on greenbelt matters, the councils have reviewed the site allocation boundary and specifically in relation to the need to access the site off the Blackpole Road. It has come to our attention that the allocation boundary that's currently drawn at 8.12 hectares would not quite include enough land to include the access and the visibility splay. So the correct still a smaller cut, but the correct site area should be 8.17 hectares. And that would include the access and visibility, part of the visibility splay within the site, and include land up to the point where the Barbourne Brook comes under the Blackpole Road. The councils don't consider that it is necessary to allocate the larger circa 13 hectare site. One particular reason for that is that the outline application that was submitted to the council, it was refused, but it was only refused on the fact that the site was within the green belt and without sufficient justification. There were no reasons for refusal relating to access or other technical matters. That application demonstrated quite helpfully how the employment buildings, car parking, access road, and circulation space, but very importantly, flood mitigation measures in the form of SUDS features, green infrastructure and landscaping could all be accommodated within a site area of circa 8 hectares and not requiring the wider site. If you'd find it helpful, we could provide you with a copy of that plan, just so that you can see what we've been looking at.
That's not in the topic paper, is it?
It's not, no.
Okay.
I actually think that the area was wider. Our specific point is that it's always been a wider area that's required. So the 8 hectares is the net developable area under the latest master plan. And it's a policy kind of that doesn't refer to being net developer. That's our main issue, really. Kind of if you look at the 8, and then you have to provide the landscaping, the drainage, green infrastructure, biodiversity, and again, actually, it becomes a quite small site. And there is more land available here under the control of the same developer to bring forward the landscaping and all the other infrastructure that's required to bring that site forward with about 8 hectares of net developer. We appreciate that the site area now includes the access, which was the other point that we made, that actually the allocation as it was drawn previously did enable access within the allocation. That's positive and welcome. That's been included, but yeah, we see it as the 8 hectares being a net developable, and then another 5 hectares in addition to that required for the drainage, landscaping, and all the green infrastructure. I appreciate we weren't here for the Greenbelt session, and that probably goes for that point as well, that we consider that actually Barbourne Brook is the better defensible boundary. As it is drawn at the moment, there's a ditch, there is some landscaping and boundary trees along there, but it's actually the brook, a proper water course that provides the much more defensible boundary to the greenbelt in the long run, and with the A449 and the slip roads beyond that as well. That's really our main point on the net developable. It should be kind of either made clear in the policy that that's kind of net, or it should be kind of allocated a larger site to enable the other supporting infrastructure come forward as part of the allocation. Thank you.
Do you want to respond on that? I mean, obviously you're coming, again, it's another one. We've got 2 different sides of the same thing that we'll probably have to take away, because I can't see that you're going to agree here and now. But if there's anything else you want to say, then.
we've been assuming that this is a site that you will want to visit, and that you can look at these issues in the context of the site. So nothing further to add on that. I didn't answer the other part of your question, which was that the South Worcestershire councils do agree that what is currently footnote 208 should be incorporated into policy, and that whether the policies map is amended to the 8.17 hectares or to the larger circa 13 hectares site, an amendment to the policies map would be required.
So are you still looking at that in terms of the green belt, or has that, what you've thought about, fed into what you've told me today?
What we thought about has fed into what we've said today. As far as the greenbelt matter is concerned, we think that the boundary of the 8.17 hectare site is a clear defensible boundary and has the required degree of permanence. Thank you.
So we would need, obviously, if we're going to look on that on site, then we would need to see that boundary. It would be helpful for us if you could. I mean, obviously, it would. You're going to be putting that as in the answer to the question that we had in the green belt. But if we could have that when we go, then that would be helpful.
Yeah, I may have missed it, but is the allocations from the council's point of view, is that effectively for the net bit of built development? And is there an expectation that there would be landscaping, etc., on land that isn't removed from the green belt, things that would fall within the not inappropriate development? So I think that was the question you were asking, wasn't it? Whether it's net. So do you see that as being an area net, subject to flood concerns and everything else, with, I'll call it greenbelt compatible development, stuff that doesn't require very special circumstances happening beyond the boundary?
I'm just wondering how best to cover this, because I'm looking at a plan which I'm finding really helpful from that outline application. The land beyond the 8.17 hectares is, first of all, it's within the floodplain where built development wouldn't be appropriate. And this plan isn't showing anything by way of flood mitigation measures, SUDS features, landscaping outside of that 8.17 hectares. The remainder of the site is open fields to all intents and purposes. So I think this is evidencing to us that everything that needs to be delivered can be delivered within that smaller area. Thank you.
But you weren't in agreement that the 8 should be net, were you? That was, no.
No, a gross figure.
It just to reiterate that the plan we have put forward, the master plan that is kind of included with our submission, all the buildings, the car park and the service yards, the access is within those 8.17 hectares. Everything else falls beyond. In the wider side, for me, that means that actually the net developable area is what's allocated. But to bring the whole development forward, including green infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, landscaping, you will need the wider side. It might be semantics, but I'm picking up the policy and I'm seeing an allocation. I assume that everything that's including supporting infrastructure will be supplied, kind of provided within 817, and it's just ambiguous, I think, in that respect, and it could need with clarifying.
From my point of view, it's a question of effectiveness. If there are elements that need to happen in that area that's not removed from the green belt, it needs to be, if it is eventually part of the scheme, it needs to be development that can go into the green belt and fall under one of the exemptions, or you'll end up in a very special circumstances argument, which could cause unintended consequences to the allocation coming forward. It's a point that comes up quite a lot with remote access to sites still in the green belt, And it's just to make sure it fits in, if should anything be needed, but it would fit into development that would be appropriate in the green belt. But we're not meant to say that, because everything's not inappropriate.
This plan seems to show everything that is required to deliver the development within the 8.17 hectares. No landscaping, green infrastructure, flood mitigation measures at all are shown outside of that 8.17 hectares. It is only that small point that in order to ensure that the visibility splay and that part of the access is included within the allocation boundary, that we need to go from 8.12 to 8.17 hectares. But if we share with you the revised allocation boundary at 8.17 hectares and this Maximus, it's referred to as a development master plan. If we share a copy of that with you as well, then hopefully that will be helpful, because you'll be able to see the two side by side.
I would just be going over the same point, so I will leave it there. Thank you.
So there is a further question about on 202 about access. I didn't have anything more on that really to ask, and I think there is some agreement on that. So unless anybody has anything else, I'll move past. Okay, so question 203 is about, it's a reallocation, number 17 at the Worcester Woods Business Park on Newtown Road. So the question is the proposed reallocation of the site in the plan justified and reflective of the current position in regard to the land? So I note that there's a planning application submitted in October 24. Probably first of all, can we just confirm the status of that?
Thank you. That planning application, which was for it was a hybrid application for a secondary school, that was a full application, and an outline application for car park for use by blue light services at the hospital was approved on the 18th of March.
Okay. I've also got a note that there's a statement of common ground for Savills, but I'm wondering if that permission comes after that or before that.
So the granting of the planning permission comes after the statement of common ground, but the written statement is not consistent with the statement of common ground, which we appreciate is not particularly helpful to you. The South Worcestershire Council's position is that this site is required for a school in order to meet the needs arising from the housing growth within the plan. And the councils wish to see this allocation confirmed for, in the most part, the secondary school, and the smaller part for employment purposes.
Okay, yeah, Savills.
Thank you, this site has got a slightly complicated history, as I think this statement of common ground alludes to, and the way in which it merged into the plan came as somewhat of a surprise to the estate. So what I want to do is give you a bit of an update to where we are, which has been touched on. So if you'll allow me. So I think the Statement of Common Ground sets out very clearly the state's position was based on sort of an agreement to sell. So we had a broad agreement between us on the basis that we reached a point where there was an agreement of sale. Parties are working collaboratively together and continue to do so. And County have obviously chosen to advance planning application. But as it sits today, there is no agreement between the County and the landowner to acquire the site. So it remains the estate's position that they continue to seek the allocation for the Newtown Road site for an employment use, as it has been in preceding versions of the plan. So I think the development management system that's already proved that an allocation for a community use to deliver a school isn't necessary. I think the fact that there's been a successful resolution to grant within recent weeks shows that an employment allocation is not a bar to delivering that planning permission. And equally, there's a policy within the plan, SWDP 43, which talks about built community facilities. And it says expressly the provision of new built community facilities or their enhancement of existing facilities will be supported where there's an identified need. So starting position in policy terms is that you can bring forward on a site allocated for something else. The reverse is true for an employment proposal. If the allocation proceeds as it is, the sort of protection that policy affords to community sites existing or allocated. So if the school doesn't advance for any reason and the landowner wants to bring forward an employment site, then the plan is a bar to doing that. I just wanted to touch very briefly on employment needs. I know you've heard that at earlier sessions of the examination, but there is a shortage of employment allocations within Worcester City itself. It's quite constrained by its local authority's natural extent. And we've submitted, both in our reps and our hearing statements, evidence relating to that need and the qualities that this site has for employment use. So in the circumstances the county does not proceed, the estate wouldn't want to be left in a position where they have an unnecessarily complicated planning journey ahead of them through the development management system. So just to summarise, our argument is that the allocation at the moment isn't justified because an education allocation isn't necessary to bring forward a school on that site. But an employment allocation would be necessary if the school didn't advance and the estate wanted to bring that forward. So there's no resistance to a school if an agreement can be reached, but we don't want to be left in a position where we have a perfectly good site that can't move forward or has a very tortuous journey in terms of moving forward. That being said, if you're minded to support an education-led allocation at this site, I think the Statement of Common Ground and our reps and hearing statements confirm that what we were looking for is something that differs from the Reg 19, and it's a more condensed site for the school and employment at the western end. So, sorry, that was slightly longer-winded than it probably needed to be, but I think the context is helpful.
You know, that is helpful, thank you. Mr. Rudge.
Thank you. The South Worcestershire Councils appreciate the predicament that the Spetchley estate find themselves in, but our concern is what's required to deliver the level of housing growth that this plan envisages. And it is absolutely essential that this site is allocated for the secondary school and for the use that it needs to be put to satisfy that education need. It's important to stress that this site was removed from the Edna, so it doesn't feature in the Edna addendum. So it's not a site that's required to provide employment land to meet the needs over the plan period to 2041. We're not reliant on this site for employment need, and I'm not trying to revisit discussions that we've previously had on the employment land requirement, but this site is needed for secondary education provision. If circumstances transpired that, for the sake of argument, the county council decided that it no longer wished to pursue this site for a secondary school, and perhaps the county council found an alternative site, then we consider it would be entirely reasonable to let the development management process kick in, and those circumstances would be a significant material consideration, and the decision maker could give appropriate weight to that in deciding whether an alternative land use was appropriate or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps just to outline a little bit more of the work that's been done to deliver the school, to set out really that it is the county council's intention that that comes forward. The demand is being driven by the needs of the settled population of Worcester, plus some of the permitted development, particularly around the urban extensions. So not only have we submitted for and gained now the planning permission, we've also got a construction contractor appointed, an academy, Oasis Academy, appointed to operate the school, and they've been involved in the design. And as has been mentioned, we are in ongoing discussions with the Spectral estate on the land. Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. Just a couple of key points. I think we'll probably set out our position clearly enough, but just to come back, firstly, that point that the policy is essential for the plan. We've already got a planning permission, well, sort of not permission, a resolution to grant something that's achieved with an employment allocation on the site as it stands today. So I can't agree that it's essential because the development management process has allowed that to happen in any event. The other thing, talking about need, it's correct that this site isn't identified. Well, it wasn't advanced, but that's my understanding is that's fundamentally because the site was being allocated for a secondary school, and therefore the evidence base didn't consider that. But as I've set out, within Worcester City, most of the need is driven from Worcester City, and within Worcester City's boundaries. Therefore, if this site hadn't been allocated for an education use, I'm pretty confident it's a very appropriate and acceptable site, and there's no reason why in employment terms you wouldn't over-allocate if that was the end result, and let the market decide what's needed and where from the allocations that are included. Thank you.
Anything else on this side?
No, thank you.
Okay, so if we move on to question 204, it's about the deallocations. I think we may have touched on this already, but the question is, why are the deallocated sites indicated in the plan when they are no longer identified for development? Yeah, I think it's agreed. I think we've agreed previously that they're not necessary in the final version of the plan, and they'll be removed through the MMs. Yeah, and then presumably any sites that are superseded as such would perhaps go in the superseded annex that we talked about as well. Yeah, okay, then that's fine. That's that. I don't have anything else on 204 unless anyone else does. Okay, anything general on this session then, before anything you needed to say that you haven't said would need to be said now? Okay, that's fine. So thanks everyone for the contributions. We'll close for today. Returning tomorrow at 9:30, when we're going to be moving on to matter 13, which is the Malvern Hills allocations. Thanks.